Hello, everybody. This is Josh Kubicki, and I'm a legal modernist, and you're listening to the Legal Modernist podcast. More people than ever are building, making, and creating cool stuff in the legal profession and the business of law. I'm not talking tech. I'm talking new business models, new kinds of talent, legal and business, new strategies for growth and addressing underserved markets, and new ways of thinking about what this profession is and should be about. And on this show, I sit down with other legal modernists to discuss the ideas, the opportunities, and the strategies that they're testing and taking advantage of so the rest of us can begin and get better at building, making, and creating our own cool stuff. And here we go.
So the business of the law is as important from just a pure financial standpoint as it is for your peace of mind and your job satisfaction. So you do have to find a firm that is a good business and makes good business decisions so that you can be the best at what you do and you don't have to worry about it. I mean, that's to this day, 26 years in, that's why I've chosen my path across firms, because I want to work at a place where I don't have to worry about it.
Welcome to the Legal Modernist podcast. What you're about to hear is sort of different. Last week we had a program at the Richmond School of Law where I teach. It was called the Legal Market Pulse Briefing. We brought in Bill Josten from Thomson Reuters, who you'll meet shortly, as well as Brooke Smith, who you just heard from. And we had a conversation about the current data, the most current data, financial data available, which Thomson Reuters collects and curates. And they shared that with us, but this was not really a conversation about the data per se. Yes, you're going to see lots of graphs, but there's some very intriguing threads that we explored here, the three of us, and hopefully you get a lot out of it. One is this concept of fatigue, right? So you're going to hear how productive we are or aren't being as lawyers, how much time we're billing, how much time we're working, where we're working from, who we're working with. But there's an interesting conversation that we begin to explore, and that is this sense of time and context switching and what technology is doing that has turned 5 hours of work into a different type of 5 hours of work. So it's still 5 hours, but it fatigues us cognitively different, emotionally differently, physically differently. So we feel more busy, even though we're still working 5 hours. It's what's happening in that 5 hours. So listen for that. The other thing is this notion that going to big law is, I'm just going to go to big law and then I'm going to cash out after 2 to 3 years. If that's your strategy, that's fine. That's a strategy to have for your career. But we hit on this, don't overlook mid-sized firms for a very particular reason, and that is one of succession planning. When partners are starting to reach retirement, there's generally conversations or not around what to do with their book of business, what to do with their clients. Now, big law notoriously has a hard time with this. And so if you're an up-and-coming associate, junior partner, you can't rely on succession planning. You got to build your own book by yourself. In mid-law, we know just culturally, partners and associates know each other. There's more personal relationships generally. Again, this is a general statement. So if you looked over a 10-year period, going into mid-law, yes, fine. Day one, your paycheck may not be as big as a peer who went to big law. But over those 10 years, your quality of life and your income has a greater likelihood of being more meaningful, whatever that means. That could be dollars, that could be time away from the office. And so we have that conversation around, well, what do you balance there? And really, is mid-law, should it be compared to big law on salary terms only? And then we have this whole concept of work from home. We know we're sort of trying to figure out what this work from home is, but there's cultural and personal consequences that we're not necessarily reading about or thinking about in a material way. And Bill, Brooks, and I sort of uncover those. So some interesting threads in here. Just a quick caveat, disclaimer, if you will. This was meant to be a LinkedIn Live event originally. Due to some technical issues on campus, I was not able to do that. So we had to record this via Zoom and in-classroom technology. It's not ideal, right? So you'll see that the slides are up often. I can't get tight shots of the people who are talking. Brooks and my heads are cut off in one of the slots. So this is not ideal. This does not reflect the quality of this podcast going forward. But I wanted to package this up. I wanted to sort of curate the pieces, not just run it from start to finish, and try to pull out the best outtakes. So anyway, without further ado, we'll dig in. I'm going to pop in from time to time as we sort of cover different areas and make sure certain things were highlighted. As always, reach out or drop a comment after you watch this. And here we go.
I am Bill Josten. I am the senior content manager for the Thomson Reuters Institute with global responsibility for thought leadership for Thomson Reuters for basically any customer in the world that has a JD. So I run thought leadership for our law firms, from small law firms to our largest global firms, and then also our corporate in-house counsel. My responsibility is essentially to understand the ins and outs of the legal market, particularly the business side of law. Firms like Brooks's firm, they're full of subject matter experts on topical practice areas. I could never compete with that. But where a lot of firms need help is in the business of law areas, in understanding market trends, and sort of being able to look at. I hate this cliche, but being able to skate where the puck's going to be, right? And I hate the cliche, but I use it because there's not a better one out there. This is data that we extract directly from the financial management systems of 175 US-based law firms. So on a monthly basis, we go in, we extract 65 metrics from these firms. This is real-time data. This is as real-time as it gets. This is from the mid-year point of 2022. This is absolutely the most current market information that you have available. If I had been invited by Brooks and his leadership team to come in and give a presentation to his executive board, this is the same stuff I would be bringing. So this is, this is stuff that I wanted to bring you our best, so you could see exactly what's going on, and treat it, like the same information I would present to high-level law firm execs. So that's what we're looking at today. Demand is a metric that we use that measures total billable hours, and really we're looking at growth in total billable hours on a year-over-year basis. So there's three different metrics here. What was 2021? That's the gray bar. What was year to date through the end of June last year compared to this year? And then the orange bar is actually Q2. So you can see where we were in terms of demand for 2021. We had incredibly high demand, almost 4%. But the number to really look at here is the number for Q2. And you can see that we're actually negative in Q2. We are positive year to date, but unfortunately, that's because we were really positive at the beginning of the year, and we've been sliding month by month ever since. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're seeing a big contraction in the amount of work that firms are doing. It's really a function of baselines. 2020, 2021, they set really high baselines.
Okay, so you hear Bill talking about a very macro level thing, total demand, right? And you heard him explain, but I just want to make sure that you got it. So when you look at that demand chart, you can see that it looks like we're down this year, right, in the last quarter. What he's basically saying is, kind of unbeknownst to all of us in the market, the pandemic actually generated greater demand. At first, everything stopped, as we know, when we went into lockdowns. But shortly thereafter, demand, that is the number or the amount of work that clients wanted or gave to lawyers, increased, jumped significantly. So for the last 2 years, we've been on a very heightened level. Our demand has been really at a massive growth level. So the point here is we're starting to slow down, and we're seeing this in mergers and acquisitions. We know that market has been on fire over recent years, and now we're starting to slow down. So all that Bill is saying is that our growth, the hyper growth we've been experiencing, is now starting to slow down. That's when he's saying baselining. We sort of baselined very high over the last couple of years, and we're not meeting those as we have in the past. So we're just slowing down. That's all. we're going to go into another conversation now about worked rates. And worked rates just simply mean the amount that we're billing clients. And you're going to hear Brooks next talk about why rates increase and when you have to increase your rates and what happens if you don't. And do all practice groups increase their rates uniformly across the firm and all that. The reason why this is important for you to know is not necessarily because you can do anything about it, but because you start to track and understand what's happening in the market, you can start to understand certain partner behavior, certain client behavior. You can kind of predict it. So you're able to navigate your daily life as a lawyer better because you know what people, the humans in the business, are experiencing, what pressure, what stresses, what's on their mind, what are they trying to accomplish that they can't, that's frustrating, what's sort of keeping them up at night. And hopefully you realize that if you understand that and you're working with a partner or a senior associate or a client, and you can sense or you know what's sort of going on, that'll make you a better lawyer. It'll make you a better human. You're more empathetic, you're more aware, and it'll help guide your behavior. So I kind of want to drill this down and like, well, okay, great, Josh, what do we do with this information? That's just one of the things. The other thing is, as you start to get acclimated with the terms and phrases that we use, you're going to generate smarter questions of yourself and your future practice and of your clients that are going to lead you to more insight, both business and legal insight. Our ability to generate questions is heavily relied upon how much knowledge we have about something, right? The more knowledge, hopefully, the smarter the question. So just keep that in mind. So coming off of demand into worked rates, you're going to hear Brooks and then Bill sort of unpack that.
As the industry drives toward increasing rates, you either join them or you fall behind. And in the last 2 years, there's been immense pressure across bands of law firms to keep up. Because if you don't and you wait, it is exceedingly difficult to close the gap. You're lucky if you can get it, and you're lucky if you have enough clients willing to tolerate the rate increase to counterweight the ones that simply say no. And, there's a lot of pressure on keeping clients happy. So at the end of the day, you're more likely to say, I'm going to pass on a rate increase this year than them telling you we're no longer going to send you one.
And it's all about identifying where you have the opportunity to make profit, and then really targeting that. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about, Brooks, is identifying where can we get rate increases, where will they be tolerated, such that on balance, the firm is moving in the right direction, but we aren't necessarily going to realize those rate increases everywhere. We've got AmLaw 100 firms where their average rate increases, when you look at, and these are 1,500, 2,000 lawyer firms, some of them, their average rate increase is 9 to 11% in some respects. We've got mid-sized firms where their rate increases are 1.5 to 2. The bigger point is just to say that there is opportunity for rate increases, but like Brooks is saying, you have to be very strategic about where you seek it.
Why don't we jump ahead to productivity and sort of, because that
Yep.
stands out.
It does, because that's the big one where it's negative, right? So productivity is really a mathematical calculation where we're looking at demand divided by headcount. So we can't talk about productivity until we talk about lawyer growth on the far right side. You see where lawyer growth is at, and it grew at 3.0% for the quarter. And I don't know where we are exactly for the year, but we're probably about 3.5, 3.7% year to date. Now, contextualize that, where you've got this much more work across this many more heads, or in the instance of Q2, you've actually got less work and more people to do it. And even in the sense of the year-to-date figure, we're taking a little bit more work, dividing it by a lot more people. So the average per lawyer productivity is declining. That's actually not an uncommon thing. It's actually more uncommon for us to see positive productivity. And that's because law firms have been very aggressive in their hiring. And the reasons for that are myriad. And frankly, I could spend an hour just talking about that. But
let me jump in and sort of unpack that a little bit. So Brooks, to you. So we see that, demand is re-baselining, sort of stabilizing, but the work per lawyer is actually less. So as a younger associate, what happens? What are some of the partner behaviors that happen when work starts drying up a little bit?
Stress, anxiety. But I actually have a theory on that downward trend, and I think it's manifested in our experience. So I'll speak from my personal experience at the firm. It's a pipeline of talent from the first day entry level associate to the senior most partner, and we have our client base, and we have a revenue expectation, and we have lawyers to do the work. And our goal is always to feed the pipeline, always to be bringing in young talent to replace the old talent. And we are as much a business as a professional apprenticeship. And so if you're really looking to the future and bringing in young people into practice, they're not coming with clients. They're not adding to the pie. They're learning and they're contributing, but it's the same amount of work. It's just being developed down into the pipeline.
Well, and I don't know if this is true or not. Check me, Bill and Brooks, anecdotally, your experience. I don't know. I don't know if it's in your deck that I saw or in all the other research that I'm actively doing, but I thought I saw over, like, say, the last 10 years, overall productivity has been declining, right? And so I think if that's true, I would welcome, Brooks, your take on that. Why are we as lawyers less busy than we were before? Is that good or bad? And Bill, from what you see, why might that be the case, that we're sort of seeing overall productivity lessening out? Is it a reckoning that having a more balanced life is starting to come into the profession? Is it a realization that technology and automation is starting to actually impact the practice, so we're able to get more accomplished with less hours? Like, are any of those things present, would you say? Or would you say, no, it's really a matter of headcount and demand?
Yeah, I certainly see that you all, as the future lawyer leaders, are in the driver's seat. I mean, there's so much demand for talent, and you all have helped shape the expectations that firms are able to promote and achieve. And it is certainly in Richmond. We're a lifestyle bar right now. I mean, people want to go home at the end of the day to play with their dogs or their kids or their spouse, or do other things and not be there at 6 a.m. and work till 10 p.m. I mean, our normative expectations for young lawyers are less than 40 hours a week, billable hours. And it used to be, and it maybe still is in bigger cities, 60 to 80 hours a week to succeed. So I do think that has crept into those numbers a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you hear so much about lawyers saying they're busier than they've ever been before, and yet the report says, and this is the State of the Legal Market report that we released in January, the report says they're working 10 fewer hours per year, or 10 fewer hours per month per lawyer. So they're not busier. And I said, but that's the wrong way to look at it, because there's a psychological effect of how busy you actually are. If I spend 8 hours in one day doing a site check, okay, I did 8 hours worth of work. If I spend 8 hours and I get 15 different projects done in 8 hours, psychologically, I'm more tired. I've booked the same number of hours, but I have accomplished a lot more, and it's more draining for me from a psychophysical standpoint. So that's an impact. That's something we have to think of, is lawyers are accomplishing more tasks because of the tech enablement.
We make a lot out of technology being integrated into law, and it's amazing, and digital transformation is here, but we don't talk about the human impact of that. And there is a lot of fatigue, not just with learning a new technology, but doing more because it increases context shift.
One of the things that we all face, whether in the practice of law or the practice of life, is you are constantly barraged by multiple competing demands that you kind of juggle naturally to deal with, but you lose attention, you lose focus, and query whether you also lose quality when you're bouncing from email to email and back again, are you really giving singular focus to the task at hand? And I thought that was a fascinating concept.
Yes.
A lot of my job is doing really two things. One, I quantify emotion. Lawyers feel a certain thing, I can put data to what they feel. And sometimes I disprove it because that leans into the second thing. The second thing is I have to analyze the impulse that less good is bad and less bad is good. Bankruptcy is a practice area that almost always contracts. Well, if bankruptcy contracts a little bit less than it did the quarter before, people think, oh, bankruptcy's doing awesome. No, bankruptcy's still down year over year. It's just not down as much as it was before. Same thing with practice areas that are trending downwards. So corporate is an area too. We have to keep an eye on it because yes, it's doing less good, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It could. We want to be mindful of that. And for somebody like Brooks, this is where the strategy really comes in, and you've got to watch for that long-term trend and really try and predict what that trend is going to be. And my money is on the fact that corporate probably will trend badly for a while. Areas where I think there's opportunities that might be growing. Real estate is still really hot. M&A is going to cool. Litigation tends to spike after an economic downturn. That didn't happen with the pandemic. It may not happen after whatever we're going to end up calling this. There's still debate over whether it's a recession or is it. It doesn't really matter. People are hurting, and that means people are going to want to sue each other when it's done. But how much are they going to want to do that? A lot of focus on in-house GCs right now is actually avoiding litigation. So you may not see as many hours going into an actual courtroom, but you may see more hours going into pre-litigation work or pre-litigation. Settlement's the wrong term for it, but sort of actions to avoid litigation, but that still require the help of outside counsel because the volume is such that in-house can't handle it themselves. So in terms of where are we watching, there's a lot of areas that we need to watch, and we're being very cautious right now. And I think law firms are too, being very cautious.
Let me jump in there.
Outlook.
Yeah, let me jump in there. In terms of associates, first-year associates or law students, choosing a practice group. Like you could look at this and be like, oh my gosh, like I was all in on IP and I was all in on bankruptcy. Like, what am I doing? So I just wanted to have a conversation. Like, one, most practice groups go through cycles, right? And part of the law firm strategy is balancing that service mix. But in terms of, say, you're a first-year associate, and say you're in corporate, and there's less work right now. Like, what do you do as an associate? Do you cross-train? You know what I mean? Into another practice? Like, what's some good advice for new lawyers that look at this and go, okay, well, how do I compete and how do I win in this space?
So, in my own personal experience, I chose law school for a practice. I wanted to do environmental, so I went to Vermont, which at the time had the #1 ranked program, although it was otherwise an average school and still is. But it was a purpose decision. And when I came out in 1996, people said, "Oh my gosh, environmental law is dead." Right? All these big old super fun cases from the 80s that kind of worn themselves out, and it was a really low point in the practice. You really should retool as an IP lawyer because that's where all the action. Silicon Valley boom, everything. It's just raining money. But I just spent 3 years in the cold learning environmental law. I think I'm going to stick it out. And to the point about cycles, every practice goes through a cycle. You have to do what makes you happy and gives you fulfillment because it's hard to be a lawyer, right? It's a stressful job, and you have to kind of love what you're doing in order to see through those bad days and enjoy the good ones. And I think also, while these trends are always so interesting to me, in my 26 years of practice, I've always been in big law, although at 4 different firms. I don't remember a year where every practice was in the positive. The beauty of a bigger law firm is that you have balancing effect of one practice is busier and one practice is slower, which doesn't mean that as an associate you jump from corporate to litigation. But buried in that bar of corporate, for example, some New York firms have 10 clients and they do billion-dollar deals. That's all they do. So when the deal market goes down, they're going to get hurt, especially that. Most other firms have a range of different corporate clients, from very big deals to medium-sized deals to small deals. And as long as you cultivate a balanced mix of clients and work, then you can kind of ride the curve and actually see better productivity than you see in the macro charts. It's also true that it's, kind of industry specific. So if the traditional retail, assemble a big package of retail and transact it, that might be down right now, but solar deals are popping through the roof with all the incentives out of DC. So, you can pivot, you can still be a corporate lawyer, but do a different type of deal, and still get that experience and learn the pivot, because once you learn the pivot, you can do it your whole career. I mean, in environmental, I've gone from a water lawyer to a species lawyer to natural resources. I mean, I can bounce around because it's fundamentally the same type of practice. It's just what you're applying. And there's certain practices where this is more acute, like in a bet the company piece of litigation. That's probably the only time your firm has a connection to that. And whether it's good or bad, they're not going to have another bet the company piece of litigation, maybe in your career. So that's a one investment. So it is kind of appealing to lean toward the clients that are more institutional or multi-practice. And honestly, our clients more and more are saying, we want to consolidate our pool of lawyers on the outside. We want you to do more of our work across different practices, because we think that there's value in economy, better rates, alternative fee arrangements. If you do all of these different silos, frankly, I think that's probably a more sustainable client that you'll be able to work with for longer. And the greatest satisfaction you get in the profession of law is the relationship with the client. And so it's far more satisfying to have a client for 20 years than it is for one big case, even if you.
Slide. This is historical hiring from 2007 to present. So where we were in Q2 at 3% headcount growth, that's still higher than any point since the great financial crisis. So even though it's declining, it's still incredibly high. So that's something to keep in mind, is law firms are still hiring a lot of people, and there's a variety of reasons for this. Mid-sized law firms in particular, they need to hire people because they're partner heavy. They have very poor leverage. They do not have an ability to push work down, and they do not have a succession plan in place. So if you're looking at trying to get into a mid-sized firm, this is a great opportunity. They need
pause right there, Bill. Pause right there, because you just hit on a very key thing that I want to slow down and rewind the tape on. For those of you that are looking for jobs, mid-sized firms, we know, do not pay on the same scale as big law. And I hear lots of law students talking about that and pursuing the big law. And I know you're Troutman, Pepper, and you're considered big law approach, but welcome to jump into this conversation, obviously. And Bill, what you just said, mid-sized firms, right, are partner heavy, right? So they need that funnel of talent that Brooks was talking about. And then Bill dropped another key term, which is succession planning. That's where partners are aging out or deciding to retire. If they don't have a senior associate or anyone to give that client to, then that client's going to disappear. Now, law firms, big law firms, are notoriously horrific at succession planning. I don't know about present company included or excluded on that. Mid-sized firms tend to, because of the culture, because people know each other better, tend to at least have the succession planning conversation. So this is the point I want to make for law students. yes, it's attractive to go after the big salary, big law, but don't forget mid-sized firms, because if you're looking at a trajectory and your ability to inherit or get closer to clients earlier in your career and develop your book, mid-sized firms do present that pathway and generally are more willing and able to give that kind of experience to you earlier in your career. Whereas some big law firms, you got to do that on your own. There's not a lot of succession going on. Senior associates are battling with each other. We don't do a really good job in our profession of teaching lawyers how to develop clients. We sort of have a knack or not. So I just want to don't forget that mid-sized firms have a lot to offer. It may not translate to your paycheck on day one, but if you look over a decade, your earning potential and all that is sort of on track with big law in many ways. I welcome your sort of thoughts.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all, but I would say that even within big law, you can, if you're a savvy purchaser, you can see that at a practice level. And you can determine, I mean, there are some practices that you can see right away have a ton of associates and they're kind of turning through them because there's a ton of work, but there's no plan for matriculation. But you can see others that, are trying to build a leverage practice, and you can see they need you, or they need two of you in successive years. And that's where your best bet is for, that pyramid to get through into the partnership.
Let me ask you this, Brooks, this is a follow-up to that. So as law students are interviewing, okay, and going through that process, wouldn't it be nice for them to know what kind of practice they're going into, right? Like, is this a churn and burn practice? Is this a practice group that has a culture of developing talent where there is more active succession planning? Like, how would you even approach that as a law student interviewing to try to uncover that in the interview? Is it possible, or do you just have to be polite and kind of go along the way?
I mean, I think you can do it with the little research into the bios that every firm has online, because you can see if people have been there since the start of their career or have moved around. And if they've moved around, it's pretty clear that, well, I guess it depends on the going or the coming side of things, but you can draw conclusions from that.
Right. See if there's a lot of high transaction in and out, that may not be a good sign. Right. Bill, I don't know if you were going to jump in on that.
Yeah, I'd love to. What you're going to have in terms of that experience is really going to vary by firm. Some firms are great at wanting to bring associates along, but keep in mind that the historically accepted statistic is that the average law firm turns over about 50% of their associates in the first 5 years. That's just normal. What we've been seeing since the pandemic is that some law firms, and that's what's on this slide, some law firms, their associate churn is closer to 25%. Other law firms, it's closer to 33%. So that's not that's not 50% of lawyers in 5 years. That's more like 150% of lawyers in 5 years. That means they're going to turn over half the lawyers they haven't even hired yet.
Okay, I want to jump in there. Did you catch what Bill just said? So he said, traditionally, we accept that in 5 years, 50% of the associates that started in year one will not be at that firm in their 5th year, 50%. What he just said is that on a rolling 12-month, on a year basis, we're seeing some firms churn out 25 to 30% of their associates not being there. So if you compound that from 1 year to 5, that's where he says they're actually going to churn out the associates they haven't even hired yet, because they're going to exceed 100% churn in under 5 years. That's a massive amount of talent being brought in and then leaving. Is this the new norm? Are we basically just a highly liquefied talent pool right now? Are we not looking for the firm, what do they call your forever home, right? When you finally land in the house that you're going to raise your family or live in for the whole life. Are there no such things as forever firms anymore? I don't know. This is just some of the interesting things that we're seeing in the data. from the productivity conversation to how we're churning through talent in a law firm. It also begs the question, where are these associates going? Are they going into mid-law? Are they just being transferred around in big law? We don't have a lot of good optics once lawyers leave the profession. So say they're going to become business owners, entrepreneurs, or they're going to be in some adjacent profession where they're not labeled as a lawyer. But my gosh, we're churning through a lot of legal talent in the market right now. It'll be interesting to see how far that goes. Anyway, I just wanted to jump in and make sure that point really hit home with what Bill just said.
But in talking to some chief HR officers at mega international firms, they were saying that even before the pandemic, their average associate tenure was 24 to 28 months. I mean, that's on average. That means some people are out of there in 6 weeks, right? So that's something to be conscious of. They said, those same firms said that the associates who started at their firm, summer associates and first years, had about a 2% chance of actually making equity partner at those firms. I mean, and that's not to say that that's a terrible situation to go into. That may be where you want to be. And equity partner may not be the goal. It certainly isn't for me. And so if it's not for you, I'm 100% with you. That's totally fine. I would offer sort of a sneaky question that will tell you a lot if you've done your homework. And you always get a chance to ask questions in an interview. A good question to ask is, how many associates have you hired in the last 2 years? You know, and you can context, you can say, you know, and I'm just wondering how much this practice area is expanding. How many associates have you hired in the last 2 years? Because you can go and look and you can see how big that practice area is. They're probably not growing by leaps and bounds. They may be growing a little bit. So if they tell you, oh, we've hired about 40 people and the practice area itself is 60, that tells you something, right? That tells you that they've had a tremendous amount of churn because they didn't go from 20 to 60 in 2 years. Nobody's growing that fast. So that's kind of a sneaky way to maybe think about some of this stuff is understand that churn. It might be right. You might want that big check and then move on to the next thing. Totally fine, nothing wrong with it. But understand the situation that you're in. Do your research. Just be a smart buyer. Brooks, you use the same term, and I think that's right. Be a smart buyer about what you're doing because that's really what you're doing. You're buying into that firm.
I actually have an observation that maybe takes us to another topic, so I apologize.
No, please.
No, please.
The effect of the pandemic. We are now seeing kind of the profound reality of, you know, we lived through 2 years of just unprecedented virtual working, and surprisingly, somewhat amazingly, firms were as profitable or more profitable than they've ever been, including ours. But now we're, you know, kind of in the post-pandemic world, and we're trying to sort out what the office environment looks like. And, you know, we have a lot of real estate. We have a belief that it is an apprenticeship where you need face time. You need to be able to walk down the hall. You need to be able to grab multiple colleagues and go to a conference room and whiteboard an idea to get to a good outcome that just can't be replicated on Zoom. And so we're, like many firms, trying to figure out how to get people back in the office. But what we've seen is that if you live in a big city where it's a 2-hour commute, the folks who aren't coming back to the office are partners. They're happy in their beach houses or their mountain houses or their getaway houses. And what we're seeing, especially true, is that when associates are forced to go back to the office and the partners aren't there, they are the most portable lawyers in the profession because it's the worst of all worlds. They're forced to be in an empty office. They're not getting any mentoring. And the street, I mean, you can get paid a lot of money to work for a New York firm from Richmond virtually, but the virtual experience is not going to create great lawyers in the future. You've got to have that person.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big compliment. Yeah, I know the whole work from home, we're still inventing it, you know, flying, you know, building an airplane while we're flying it. But what you hit on is so true. I mean, if you're just there for the paycheck, okay, that's one segment of lawyer and whatever, we get it. And it's kind of baked into the business model of law firms that there's going to be associate attrition and all that. But yeah, the work from home sounds nice, but there are other elements here that are at play. And this is, I will, your firm, Troutman Pepper, just launched Troutman U, right? A university. It's all around learning and development and trying to refashion this. It's really an interesting time. And I try to say this to law students, and I had the privilege of being in front of your first year class last week. This is an amazing time to be starting your law career. Like, we're just at a very interesting, yes, you could say it's stressful, it's unpredictable. In the past, we kind of, all this was formulaic. We knew the recipe. We just baked the same kind of lawyer year in and year out. Okay, great. But we're truly at this time where it's different. And there are more opportunities. Bill just mentioned, a few minutes ago, if equity partner is not sort of your thing. But there's there's multiple other streams and pathways there. But keeping this work from home and your work environment and creating relationships with your associates. And the other thing I stress too is business professionals are in the office too. They're your peers as well. And there's been this historical cultural divide between lawyer, non-lawyer, support staff, and fee earner. And I urge the cultures I've been in the law firms that seem most robust and healthy are the ones where that division doesn't exist. You can learn a lot from your business professional colleagues. I always say, as first-year associates, you should go seek out whatever they're called. We used to call them librarians. I think they're like resource specialists or something like that. Like, they are immense. They have their finger on the button of so many resources that can make your life so much easier, right? So even just going to the office and finding those people, using that time in person to connect.
Absolutely. And as you say, there's a full universe around you in most firms that, unless you know them, when you have a filing on a Friday afternoon and you don't know the person to call to help you squeak it in, I mean, that's a very stressful moment. And it's not always virtual. It's, there's still places here where it's, 3 hard copies by 5 p.m. And if they're not there with an original, you missed the jurisdictional deadline.
Yeah.
Josh, if I could chime in on a couple of things there. One, we've actually researched this work from home thing in a couple of different contexts. And what we've seen is flexibility in work arrangements, and that can mean work from home. It doesn't have to, but flexibility in work arrangements is one of the top considerations for senior associates in how much they like their firm. And the theory that we're testing and the hypothesis that we're working off of, and thus far it's proved true, is they feel like they've earned a degree of autonomy by that point. And these are our 5th, 8th, in some cases 10th year associates. They've paid their dues. They've had that time in the office because their last couple of years have been remote, but they had that time in the office. For junior associates, for people starting out, it's career progression. They want to know what that path looks like. And Brooks, to your point, that path is really hard without some interpersonal connection. Being in the office and having that ability to bounce ideas and to, have the sort of, everybody used the term asynchronous conversations. That is truly important. And frankly, that's still how a lot of work gets assigned. And I'm sure, Brooks, one of the considerations you're going through in terms of how do we build work from home is how do we equitably distribute work when there's a proximity bias. Some people are sitting right there, give them the matters. Other people are working remote. Oh, gee, I kind of forgot they existed. Please, for the love of God, please avoid falling into the trap of credentialism. There's a lot of lawyers who think that a law degree means something. It doesn't. If you ever see my email signature, I keep ESQ on my signature. That's purely because of credentialism. There are lawyers who give me more credence because I have a law degree and I passed the bar and I practiced for a few years before I went to work for TR. Don't fall into that trap of credentialism, assuming, oh, well, the guy in finance doesn't have a law degree. He's not going to have anything to teach me. Yeah, he does. Same thing with the library. I have seen so many people mistreat library and knowledge management resource staff because they assume, oh, well, this is a legal question. They're not going to understand. Oh, yeah, they do. Because I guarantee you, whatever you're researching for the first time, they've done 10 times. So think about them as a resource that you can leverage and as an expert that you can turn to, because they really are. Why pay attention to the business of law? It's because it gives you an opportunity to be good at something that someone else is not good at. There's always an advantage of being good at something someone else isn't. If you think about it in the context of a single firm, if I'm an associate who understands how the business of law works and how what I am doing impacts the firm's ability to make profit and to generate revenue and to attract and retain clients, I am light years ahead of most of my colleagues. I am going to be able to start developing a book of business. I am going to be able to start contributing more productively to the firm. And that is going to put me on the radar very, very favorably relative to other lawyers who struggle with that. If I can sit down and have a conversation with a partner about that type of stuff, that's a tremendous credibility builder.